then. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the ITSS Verona membership series. My name is Austin Parcells, and my partner here is Alberto Trame. We're part of the Southeast Asia and Oceanic group at ITSS Verona. With us today is Giulia Pompili. She's a journalist for Il Foglio, where she sits on the Asia Pacific desk. Giulia is also the author of Katane, which is an Asian Pacific Italian language newsletter, and she's the author of Sotto Lo Stesso Cielo. My Italian's not great, but I think I got that. So welcome, Giulia, and thank you for joining us. My first question, in 1 minute here. So how does Australia and New Zealand deal with the rising tensions between China and the United States over Taiwan right
now? This is a very interesting question, but just because for people like me who observe the evolution of the situation in the East Asia and the Indo-Pacific area since more than 10 years. For Australia and New Zealand, the awareness of what China wants to do with the neighbors and with other countries, mainly Western countries in other parts of the world, was a wake-up call in more earlier than us. I mean, we recognize that there was a problem in Europe, mainly in Europe, in 2018, 2019. That was because Italy joined the Belt and Road project, and that was a very clear signal that something was changing about the attitude of the Chinese in Europe too. But since then, since the 2019, we were looking at the Asian affairs and the evolution of the international relations by China like something very far from us. That was quite different from the point of view of the Australia or New Zealand. I mean, Australia has a huge population of Chinese immigrants, and the weaponized of the immigration was a great issue for Australia well before our recognition of the problem. And we know how much the politics and the relation with China for Australia mainly was an internal affair problem, an internal affair issue, not only an international relation, a foreign policy problem. That's why looking at these examples, even the European countries and even the European Commission and the European Parliament recognize that China is no more something about foreign affairs, it's about internal affairs. And so your question was about how much it affected politics in Australia and New Zealand. And the short answer is a lot. We know how much the discussion that at the politics level was centered in the recent years on how much one politician and another is close to Chinese business, for example, and for Australia, for New Zealand, it's less recognized like this, the problem, but for Australia, the politic issue is also about the business level, because Australia is dependent from the economy, from the Chinese economy, so deeply that closing the borders to every single business from China, it's quite impossible. There are so much. So we have a lot of levels of problems. There is a business level problem that is about how we deal with the Chinese. And there is an intelligence problem because the universities in Australia are full of Chinese students. And when Donald Trump came out and say, okay, every single Chinese student is a potential spy. And for Australia was like a crazy problem because, you know, how can we deal with that? How can we recognize that a potential spy from a single student? So it's not easy, of course, and Australia has, I mean, the Scott Morrison government changed something when he decided to invest a lot of money in the nuclear submarine. That was the game changer. And the signal that something is going on, something, the shift toward the US is more than a strategic autonomy that they were asking to Indo-Pacific countries.
Okay. Okay. I'm glad you mentioned the Belt and Road Initiative because that was sort of my next question. So Japan obviously plays a huge role in South Asia. What's their perspective on China's Belt and Road Initiative, and how does it balance or clash with Japan's role in the Quad?
For Japan, it's a big. I think that it's a bigger problem than for the Australians, and the reason is that the history said a lot about the relations between Japan and China. In the latest 10 years, the government of Japan was led by a man, Abe Shinzo, that had a lot of problems in the approaching on the China issue and in the relations with the Chinese. Abe Shinzo has his grandfather that was a crucial man in the Second World War, and all the Abe dynasty, politicians dynasty, was recognized by the Chinese and by the South Koreans as a very the biggest enemy of the rise of the power of the Chinese. So that's why Abe Shinzo had to work a lot to rebuild a relation, independent relation with Beijing. One of the reasons why they waited a lot during the first phase of the pandemic in the first months of the 2020 was not the Olympic game. That this is something that in the foreign ministry in Tokyo, they told me very often. The reason was not to call the emergency. The reason of this kind of waiting by the Japanese authority was not the Olympic game, but the first official trip of Xi Jinping in Tokyo after like 10 years. The spring trip by Xi Jinping was made by, how can I say, it was very symbolic, and everyone recognized that kind of state trip was the symbol of the building up a new relation between China and Japan. Was cancelled, of course, for the pandemic, and then Abe Shinzo was dismissed, and then two other prime ministers came out in Tokyo. But anyhow, what the legacy of Abe Shinzo is this kind of Japan wants to be the new model, not with the US, not completely with the US, but not even with China. Something in the middle. But the difference is that when the European Union said the same, Macron and Angela Merkel said often, we want to be in a middle way. We want to be this competition, okay, but not only competition, also talks and strategical engagements. The problem is that the European Union does not know enough China. And for the Japanese, it's completely different. When I have to understand something that is changing in China, I always go also on the Japanese newspapers because they have the biggest and the smartest analysts on the China issues. They are close geographically, and they are close even for the mentality. For Japan, it's very important to understand China. And so there is a proximity in all the way we understand this. Can the Quad balance this? I think that the Quad is, and I'm not alone when I say that. I think that for Japan, but even for Australia, the Quad is just a cosmetic agreement. It's not a real agreement that will bring something, a new relationship. The Japanese doesn't trust a lot in India, and they always said that India is a country that you cannot manage because you cannot realize what they really want and what they really want to do. And for the alliance between the US, Australia, and Japan, it's more predictable, of course, but it's not under the Quad umbrella. It's just independently predictable. So that's why for the Japanese politicians does not invest a lot on the Quad. And even South Korea, that at first wanted a lot to join the Quad, at the same time when they said they saw that Australia signed the agreement with the UK and the US in the AUKUS, they said, okay, the Quad is dismissed at all. Now the real agreement is the AUKUS. So is another party to join.
Yeah, and one more question. Talking about agreements, you mentioned the Quad, and in the wake of that, what do you think about the recent visit of Secretary Blinken to Indonesia? And within which structure can you envisage an US-Asian engagement, especially after Trump abandoned the Trans-Pacific Partnership in 2017?
After the Blinken visit in Indonesia, and he had to stop the visit before before he landed in Bangkok, so he
activity, yeah.
Yes, so the third country that was quite important, Thailand, was skipped from the trip. So after the Blinken visit, I have read a lot of strange editorials in Indonesian newspapers. Indonesia was the very first South Asian country that blew up the boats of Chinese fishermen who went around the territorial waters near Natuna. You remember very well. So they have their own strategy on China, toward China. Jokowi was in the situation after the start of the pandemic. He in the emergency, he had to ask for help to the Chinese. But the reality is that Indonesia has always had specific politics on China. And that was not understandable enough for the US. And that is why the editorials on the Indonesian newspapers was a bit, they were a bit criticizing the naivete of the US. Okay, they want to come here and ask us to join a team, an anti-China team. But we are here and we have to deal with China and with the pressures of China. And they don't know, that they don't even realize how much cost and how difficult it is. So I think that this kind of, Kamala Harris did more or less the same few months ago with these official trips in Southeast Asia. They really want to let Southeast Asians join this anti-China team, but it's not so easy. And maybe this alternative at the Belt and Road, this Indo-Pacific strategy, has to come with something concrete. It's not only about values that is, we know that are super important and are our priority, but for people like Indonesians, they said, okay, we are with you, but what is the consequences? Because economically we have consequences if we join you. On the other hand, we have Bali, we have a big neighbor, but he can help whenever we want. So it's not easy, and it's not easy even the position of the US. But since now, from Trump to Biden, we saw just these official trips with an empty box. And it's difficult to, convince other countries to join if you don't have nothing to offer.
Mm-hmm. And talking maybe of empty boxes too, we can also just analyze the diplomatic boycott from the US of the Winter Olympics that possibly is merely symbolic. And do you think that in the realm of sports, more should be done in that regard, especially after the disappearance of the tennis player Peng Shuai? Or do you think that acting on this regard, so talking about human rights, is a way that cannot affect China in any way?
The Winter Olympics are the biggest spot of the new China dream by Xi Jinping. So doing something that is connected to the publicity and to showing up this China dream is not easy to support. How can I say, for the Chinese, it's not so easy to understand the someone who doesn't want to come to your party, to your big party. So it's a diplomatic boycott, so it's not a real damage that you do to another country. It's not the 1980 boycott by the US to the Summer Olympic in Moscow. But anyway, something cosmetic is done. For talking about the reasons, I think that for the US, the problem was not only punctual issue, but the word genocide. If Joe Biden came into the White House and said after a few months that the definition of what the Chinese do in Xinjiang is genocide. And I think that the administration recognized how big was this definition just after a few days when they had to recognize also the Armenian one as a genocide. They were waiting for years that the US administration defined that as a genocide. So if you define something that you know, because we know how much the pressure by the Chinese officials in Xinjiang for, against the Uyghur is big. But if you make this kind of step, that is a very big step against China, you cannot go there with an empty mind and go there to the sitting and watching the opening ceremony in February, that we will see it will be the biggest event for the new Xi Jinping China. We will see an opening ceremony celebrating the new China model. Exactly like in 2008 was the celebration of the Chinese, of the new China in developing. The one in February will be the celebration of the power of China as a real alternative to the US. So I think that for the US officials go there, even for the vice president of the Secretary of the States, I don't know, the Ministry of Sport, sitting there and watch all this propaganda would be, after defined the act of the Chinese official in Xinjiang as a genocide, would be an hypocritical and yes, hyper-hypocritical gesture. So that's why the boycott is not about damage the Chinese Olympic, in my opinion, but it's more an act to be more coherent for the US officials. And that is why a lot of other countries are doing the same. I mean, the Japanese, even New Zealand, the New Zealand officials said, we will not boycott, but we will not send any officials to the ceremonies. It's not a boycott as we understand, as we know in the past, like the one that Boris Johnson said, I'm against the boycotts, okay. But on the other hand, you have to stay in a situation of coherence, and that is the only signal that you can send.
But only a signal in this regard.
Only a signal, yes.
Okay.
It's more powerful. For example, the decision that the Biden administration is doing about the stuff from Xinjiang, the import of stuff of any kind of importation from China. If you don't have a certification that is not made by forced labor in the Xinjiang area, you cannot import it in the US. So for Intel, for example, was a big problem. That is more than a signal, because you are choking a part of the production of the Chinese production. It is more powerful because
the economic side, as always, is the one where you should tackle it.
Exactly.
Okay, I think we're done with the interview.
Thank you so much, Giulia.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
Yeah, and have a happy new year.
And you too.